The starship Horizon drifted into the silent void of space, a once mighty vessel now reduced to a flickering shadow of its former self. On the bridge, Captain Alara stood motionless, her gaze locked onto the main display that showed the bleak status of their systems. The lights overhead were dim, casting long shadows that mirrored the despair in her heart. The Horizon had been their last hope, a beacon for the remnants of the Tamar civilization. Now it was failing them. The Tamar had been a grand people, their empire spanning countless star systems, their technology, the envy of the galaxy. But those days were gone, swept away by a catastrophic event that had left their homeworld a lifeless husk. The survivors had gathered what they could, fleeing into the stars aboard the Horizon, their last and greatest ship. For decades, they had wandered, searching for a new home, a place to rebuild. But as the years stretched on, their hope had dwindled, replaced by a gnawing fear that they were doomed to drift forever. The ship had been their sanctuary, a self-contained world where they had preserved their culture, their knowledge, their way of life. But now, the systems that sustained them were failing. The engines, once powerful enough to cross galaxies, had sputtered and died, leaving them stranded in an uncharted sector, far from any known space. The power reserves were almost depleted, and the life support systems were on the brink of collapse. The ship was dying, and with it, the last of the Tamar. Alara's second-in-command, Lyra, approached her with a grim expression. Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of fear that she couldn't hide. "Captain, we've lost all propulsion. The engines are beyond repair. We have enough power for life support for a few more cycles, but after that," she hesitated, knowing that the words she was about to speak would only confirm what they all feared. Alara nodded slowly, her mind racing for a solution that simply didn't exist. She had known this moment was coming, had felt it in the way the ship shuddered more violently with each passing day, in the way the lights flickered just a little longer before stabilizing. But knowing it and facing it were two different things. "We've been through worse," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. "There's always a way." Lyra shook her head, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored Alara's own. "Not this time, Captain. We've tried everything. The engineers have done all they can, but the ship, it's just too old. We're running out of time." Alara turned away, staring out at the endless expanse of stars beyond the viewport. She had led these people for so long, through so many dangers, always finding a way to keep them safe. But now, as she looked out at the cold, uncaring void, she felt a crushing weight of responsibility. The Horizon had been her charge, her mission to protect. And now it was failing, and she with it. As she stood there, lost in thought, a sharp, insistent beep broke through the silence. Lyra's head snapped around to the console, her hands moving quickly over the controls. "Captain, we're picking up a signal." Alara's heart skipped a beat. A signal? Out here in the middle of nowhere? It seemed impossible. She moved to stand beside Lyra, her eyes scanning the console. The signal was faint, but it was there, a steady pulse cutting through the static of the ship's failing sensors. "What is it?" Alara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's fingers flew over the controls, enhancing the signal, trying to make sense of it. "It's a ship," she said finally, her voice tinged with disbelief. "A human ship." For a moment, Alara didn't know what to think. The humans were a young race, still finding their way in the galaxy. They were known for their boldness, their willingness to take risks that more established civilizations would avoid. But their technology was crude, their ships nothing compared to the sleek, sophisticated vessels of the Tamar. And yet, here they were, in the same uncharted sector as the Horizon, their signal a beacon in the darkness. Could it be a coincidence, or was this something more? "Open a channel," Alara ordered, her voice steady once more. This was their only chance, no matter how slim it might be. Lyra nodded, her hands moving quickly as she established the connection. The bridge was filled with a tense silence, the crew holding their breath as they waited for a response. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a voice crackled over the speakers. It was rough, unpolished, and unmistakably human. "This is Captain Jonah of the starship Vanguard. We received your distress signal. How can we assist?" Alara felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of hope and doubt. Could these humans really help them? Their technology was so primitive compared to Tamar standards, their ships barely more than flying scraffiaps. But they were here, and they were offering help. She swallowed her pride, knowing that this was not the time for arrogance. "This is Captain Alara of the Tamar ship Horizon. Our engines have failed, and our systems are critical. We are in need of immediate assistance." There was a brief pause, and then Jonah's voice returned, filled with a determination that took Alara by surprise. "Hold tight, Captain. We're on our way." As the signal cut off, the bridge was filled with a stunned silence. The crew looked to Alara, their eyes reflecting the same uncertainty she felt. They had been prepared for the end, for the slow, inevitable march toward extinction. But now, against all odds, there was a glimmer of hope. Alara took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was their chance, their only chance. They would have to trust these humans, no matter how uncertain the outcome. "Prepare to receive them," she ordered, her voice firm. "And let's hope they're as resourceful as they claim to be." The Vanguard docked with the Horizon with a faint thud that echoed through the dying ship. The Tamar crew, their faces lined with worry and exhaustion, gathered in the docking bay to greet their unexpected visitors. The air was thick with tension, a mix of hope and skepticism hanging over them like a shroud. The Tamar had always prided themselves on their advanced technology, their meticulous craftsmanship. To place their trust in a species as young and unpredictable as humans felt like a gamble, one that many were reluctant to make. The docking bay doors hissed open, revealing the humans for the first time. They were an odd sight to the Tamar, who were accustomed to sleek uniforms and polished appearances. The human crew wore a mix of practical, utilitarian suits, some parts scuffed and worn, others patched together with mismatched materials. They carried a variety of tools, some of which looked as though they had been cobbled together from spare parts. Leading the group was Captain Jonah, a tall man with a rugged, weathered look. His hair was a mess of dark curls, and a few days' worth of stubble covered his chin. Despite his rough appearance, there was a sharpness in his eyes, a keen intelligence that suggested he was more than just a scrappy engineer. Jonah stepped forward, his boots echoing on the metal floor of the docking bay. He took a quick look around, assessing the situation with a practiced eye before turning to face Captain Alara. "Captain," he said, nodding respectfully, "I'm Jonah. We're here to help." Alara studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. She was used to commanding the respect of her crew, of dealing with beings who recognized the greatness of the Tamar. But these humans seemed unimpressed by the grandeur of the Horizon. Instead, they looked at it as a challenge, something to be fixed, patched up, and sent on its way. "We appreciate your assistance," Alara replied, keeping her voice neutral. "But I must admit, I'm curious. Your technology is far less advanced than ours. How do you plan to repair systems that our best engineers have failed to restore?" Jonah's lips curled into a small, confident smile. "Well, Captain, we might not have all the fancy tech that you do, but what we lack in sophistication, we make up for in creativity. Sometimes it's not about having the best tools, it's about knowing how to use what you've got." Behind him, his crew began unpacking their equipment. Riley, a short woman with a shock of bright red hair, set up a portable terminal, her fingers moving quickly across the screen as she ran diagnostics on the Horizon's systems. Grant, a towering man with a calm demeanor, pulled out a set of tools that looked like they'd been salvaged from a junkyard. The Tamar crew watched with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, unsure of what to make of these strange visitors. Lyra, Alera's second-in-command, stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she observed the humans. "You should know that our systems are incredibly complex. They require precise calibration and specialized parts. Improvisation won't work here." Jonah turned to face her, his expression serious. "I get that your systems are advanced, but that's exactly the problem. They're too advanced to perfect. When something breaks, it's like trying to fix a clock with a sledgehammer. What we do is different. We don't aim for perfection. We aim to get the job done." He walked over to one of the consoles, studying the flickering readouts. "Your ship is holding on by a thread, and that thread's about to snap. We're going to shore it up, patch it together, and give you the time you need to figure out your next move. It might not be pretty, but it'll work." Alara exchanged a glance with Lyra, who looked unconvinced but remained silent. The Tamar had always believed in doing things the right way, the proper way. But now, as they stood on the brink of extinction, perhaps it was time to embrace a new way of thinking. "Do what you need to do," Alara said finally, her voice tinged with resignation. "Just be careful. This ship is all we have left." Jonah nodded, his expression softening slightly. "We'll treat her with respect, Captain. I promise you that." With that, the human crew got to work. They moved through the ship with a kind of controlled chaos, their movements quick and purposeful. Riley tapped into the Horizon's mainframe, her eyes scanning lines of code as she bypassed security protocols with ease. Grant and a few others spread out, identifying areas where power could be rerouted or systems bypassed entirely. The Tamar crew watched, unsure of what to make of the humans' unconventional methods. They were used to meticulous repairs, to engineers who took their time, ensuring every component was perfectly aligned. But the humans were different. They didn't hesitate to rip out wiring or jury-rig connections, their hands moving with a kind of reckless abandon that made the Tamar engineers wince. As the hours passed, the results began to speak for themselves. Systems that had been offline for cycles flickered back to life. The lights, which had been dim and flickering, now shone brightly, casting the ship in a warm, steady glow. Life support, which had been on the verge of failure, hummed with renewed energy. Alara couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as she watched the transformation unfold. The humans were not what she had expected. They were rough around the edges, their methods far from refined, but they were effective. They understood something that the Tamar had lost sight of: the importance of adaptability, of finding solutions in the face of impossible odds. Jonah caught her eye and smiled, a hint of pride in his expression. "See, Captain? Sometimes you just need to shake things up a bit." Alara nodded slowly, her mind racing with the implications of what she was seeing. The Tamar had always prided themselves on their knowledge, their precision. But perhaps in their pursuit of perfection, they had lost something vital: the ability to adapt, to think outside the confines of their own rigid structures. As the Vanguard's crew continued their work, a new thought began to take root in Alera's mind. Maybe, just maybe, these humans had more to teach them than she had ever imagined. The days blurred together as the human crew worked tirelessly to stabilize the Horizon. The ship, once a symbol of Tamar pride and technological prowess, now resembled a patchwork of old and new, held together by the sheer will and resourcefulness of the Vanguard's crew. Despite their unorthodox methods, the humans were making progress, and the once failing systems were slowly coming back to life. But the fragile balance they had achieved was about to be tested. It started with a low hum, barely noticeable at first, but quickly growing into a deep, ominous vibration that resonated through the entire ship. The lights flickered, and the consoles around the bridge began to flash warnings in rapid succession. Captain Alara was on her feet in an instant, her heart pounding as she scanned the readouts. "Status report," she demanded, her voice cutting through the rising tension. Lyra was already at her station, her fingers flying over the controls as she tried to make sense of the data. "It's the power grid, Captain. We've got a cascading failure in the secondary nexus. The overload is spreading to the other systems. If we don't shut it down, we're going to lose everything." Panic surged through the bridge as the crew realized the gravity of the situation. All the work they had done, all the progress they had made, was on the brink of unraveling. The ship shuddered again, and the lights dimmed even further, casting the bridge in a ghostly half-light. "Seal off the affected sections and reroute power to the main grid," Alara ordered, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. But Lyra shook her head, her face pale. "It's too late, Captain. The overload is too widespread. If we reroute now, we'll just shift the problem to the main grid, and then we'll be in an even worse situation." Alara's mind raced, searching for a solution, but every option seemed to lead to the same grim outcome. The ship was failing, and they were running out of time. She looked around the bridge, seeing the fear and uncertainty in the eyes of her crew. They were counting on her to find a way out of this, but for the first time, she felt completely helpless. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, Jonah burst onto the bridge, his face set in a grim expression. He had heard the alarms and knew exactly what was happening. "Captain, we need to take drastic action," Jonah said, his voice steady and resolute. "If we don't do something now, we're going to lose the entire ship." Alara turned to him, desperation in her eyes. "What can we do? The systems are failing faster than we can shut them down. If we don't contain the overload, the ship will tear itself apart." Jonah glanced at the flickering consoles, his mind working quickly. "There's one thing we can try, but it's extremely risky. We need to bypass the secondary nexus entirely and reroute power directly from the core. It's the only way to stabilize the grid before the overload spreads." Alara's eyes widened in shock. "The core? That's incredibly dangerous. If something goes wrong, we could blow the entire ship apart." Jonah nodded, his expression grave. "I know, but it's our only option. The core is the most stable source of power we have left. If we can bypass the damaged systems and feed power directly into the grid, we might be able to contain the overload and stabilize the ship. But we'll have to move fast, and there's no room for error." Alara looked into Jonah's eyes, seeing the determination and confidence there. He believed in this plan, risky as it was. And in that moment, she realized that she didn't have a choice. It was either take the gamble or watch the horizon die. "Do it," she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for doubt. "But make sure you don't blow us all to pieces." Jonah allowed himself a brief, tight-lipped smile. "We'll do our best, Captain. Just hold on." He turned to his crew, who were already moving into action, their faces grim with determination. Riley and Grant raced to the engineering bay, where they would need to access the core directly. Meanwhile, Jonah stayed on the bridge, coordinating the efforts and making sure the bypass went as smoothly as possible. The ship continued to shudder as the overload spread, but Jonah's crew worked with a calm efficiency that belied the danger of the situation. Riley's hands were a blur as she adjusted the power settings, her brow furrowed in concentration. Grant moved with surprising agility for his size, connecting cables and rerouting circuits with practiced ease. Back on the bridge, Alara watched the power levels fluctuate wildly, the readouts a chaotic mess of warnings and alerts. Her heart raced as she imagined the worst, a catastrophic failure that would end their journey in an instant. Almost there, Jonah muttered under his breath, his eyes never leaving the console in front of him. Just a little more. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity, as the crew held their breath, waiting for the outcome. Finally, Jonah looked up, his expression a mix of relief and caution. Engaging the bypass, he announced, "Riley, Grant, stand by." Standing by, Riley's voice crackled over the comms, tense but controlled. "Do it," Jonah commanded. There was a brief moment of silence, followed by a deep, resonating hum as the power surged through the ship. The lights flickered, then steadied, glowing brighter than they had in days. The consoles that had been flashing red with warnings suddenly returned to normal, the alarms silencing one by one. Alara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, the tension in the room easing slightly as the crew began to realize what had just happened. Against all odds, the gamble had paid off. The ship was stabilizing. "Power levels are holding," Lyra reported, her voice trembling slightly with relief. "The grid is stable." Jonah nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Good work, everyone. We've bought ourselves some time." Alara turned to him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "You did it, Jonah. You saved us." Jonah shrugged, though the pride in his eyes was unmistakable. "We're not out of the woods yet, Captain, but we've got a fighting chance now. Let's not waste it." As the bridge settled into a tense calm, Alara couldn't help but marvel at the humans' resilience. They had taken a desperate situation and turned it around, using nothing but their wits and sheer determination. It was a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. The horizon was still scarred, still fragile, but it was alive. And for the first time in a long while, Alara felt a glimmer of hope that they might just make it through this, after all. With the horizon stabilized, the Tamar crew had a chance to catch their breath. But the ordeal had taken its toll. The ship was scarred, its once pristine systems patched together with whatever the humans could find. Alara stood on the bridge, staring at the stars outside the viewport. They were alive, but their future was still uncertain. They had lost so much, and now even their ship felt like a shadow of what it once was. Jonah approached her, his expression thoughtful. "You're thinking about what comes next." Alara nodded. "We've survived, but at what cost? Our ship, our people, we've lost so much." Jonah was silent for a moment, then he spoke softly. "Survival isn't just about holding on to the past. Sometimes it's about letting go and finding a new way forward." His words struck a chord with Alara. The Tamar had always been a proud race, clinging to their traditions and their technology. But perhaps it was time to embrace change, to adapt and evolve in ways they had never imagined. The horizon was repaired, but it was no longer the same ship that had set out on its journey so many years ago. It was a patchwork of old and new, Tamar and human technology fused together in a way that had never been seen before. As they prepared to set off once more, Alara addressed her crew. "We've been through a lot and we've lost much, but we've also gained something: new allies, new ideas, and a new purpose." She looked at Jonah, who stood among his crew, a look of quiet pride on his face. "The horizon is no longer just a ship. It's a symbol of our resilience, our willingness to adapt and survive, no matter the odds." The crew cheered, their spirits lifted by the captain's words. They had faced the brink of extinction and emerged stronger for it. As the horizon set off into the stars, Alara felt a renewed sense of hope. They didn't know what the future held, but they were ready to face it together, Tamar and human, united by their shared determination to survive. And in the vastness of space, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them with courage, ingenuity, and the unbreakable will to endure.